We actually didn't think of selling the company. We were approached. And sometimes you're approached and a number's put in front of you and it's too good to turn down. I've learned from businesses every deal takes 3 times as long as you think. I like to think that that's how you compress time by
Mhm.
asking the right questions.
Hi, I'm Kate Chichi, and welcome to Deal Diaries, where business owners share how they bought and sold businesses so we don't have to learn the hard way. Let's dive in. AJ bought a company, scaled it, and sold it to fund 27 investments. AJ also took a sport from 72 to 156 countries and co founded a sleep tech company with Gary Brecka, one of the biggest names in the longevity space. AJ, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Back in 2014, you were working in sports apparel and you decided to buy Champ Pro. What made you want to buy a company in the sports apparel space?
I saw unique opportunity in that space, a white space, especially there are certain legislations that are passed around that time as well in the sports apparel world around tariffs and gains when it came to supply chain. And so I think when anytime you're looking at buying a company, you look for what is the arbitrage within the ecosystem or the white space. And sometimes the arbitrage exists on many levels. So it's not so linear, but with Champro, we saw a commodity where we could make real upside and make value at the same time, whilst creating a real work stream and a real important product that we could pass on and sell.
Before you found Champ Pro, what were the criteria you were looking for in acquiring a business?
We were looking for a company to solve a real world problem, already had an established foothold in the market from an IP or brand capacity. At the same time, also had the ability when you reverse engineer and you back into any sort of exit criteria. It was more so looking at that and going, okay, well, it's a business that when you look at the backdrop, it has an exit potential as far as creating real value, capturing alpha, and then from an EBITDA multiple. So you look at that commercial viability. And then look at the culture. Once you start doing diligence within a company, the people are the culture, and the culture is the oxygen. Everything else is a feature, and that's really all that matters. So those were kind of the two high level.
Actually, a lot of the people that I interview tend to say that first time buyers underestimate the impact culture has on an acquisition. Can you speak more about assessing culture and making sure it's the right fit for you?
Yeah, you measure culture in any workplace via laughter and smiles. I always say that they're tangible measures of culture. But in its more intrinsic value, it's more autonomous in today's autonomous work environment, right? We have the zoomification of the world and the teamification of the world. How does that employee handle their daily KPI prerequisites without me being there? And how do they model and embody the organizational structure autonomously as well? My big thing, if my employees can think like I do, answer questions on their own and solve the problems autonomously without me being there, then I've created a good enough culture that embeds them thinking very like intrinsically for themselves and obviously providing their own cerebral horsepower. So that's one way of measuring it. And the other part is do they play nicely in a sandbox with other boys and girls, with other teammates, employees. That's another way of measuring culture. And then there's different tests that Myers-Briggs tests and a range of other tests that you can kind of use to measure culture.
And what do you do in your own company to instill the culture of this autonomy and having people think similarly to you?
Part of it is you can do different things. Over COVID, lunch and learns became very popular. One of the things we do now is a lunch and learn, but slightly different. We'll bring someone from outside the organization, from a completely agnostic industry. So someone who is a former Olympian has won 3 gold medals. We'll have them come in and talk about training for the Olympics. It's just a source of inspiration in everyday life. We've had cancer survivors come in and it drives the mentality of the collective and shows them that at the end of the day, all that matters is humanism. I believe that like we as human beings are we knew instinctually that, hey, once we got to a certain EBITDA number or revenue number, there'd be opportunities in the marketplace. It proved to be true. And so it was really reverse engineering from there. Once we got to that number, we knew what the multiple could be. When your business gets to a certain number and private equity firms, etc., start calling you to see if there's interest in acquiring you, then you're doing something right. at the same time. You could be doing something wrong. You could be from negative revenue and could be a distressed sale, but at the same time, it wasn't at the times.
And how did you know what the possible multiples would be given a certain EBITDA?
You hire an outside firm. Many groups who do this for you, PwC, will kind of benchmark as to what other companies are going for within your industry, and then also what assets you hold that are valuable. And then from there, they kind of add to that number, EBITDA multiple, and kind of the revenue number. And so we used an outside firm to kind of benchmark our valuation and based on assets of the business. And that's how we got to that top line.
And you hired the outside firm before you acquired Champro, or this was already something you did closer to the sale of Champro?
Closer to the sale.
Closer to sale. Is there any way to assess the possible exit when you're considering an acquisition?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're considering an acquisition, you could look at the company's doing 10 million right now. I know based on the growth rate from the last 3 years, and they've grown 20% year over year. And if I can increase that velocity or double down by 1x order of magnitude, then I know this is what I could get in 5 years.
And then you buy Champro. What did that first year post acquisition look like for you?
It was rough because efficiency is the biggest thing. I talk about efficiency in things like supply chain optimization, things like shipping optimization, warehousing, employees, manufacturing. So it's pretty rough year one, and then it gets better. The biggest thing is this too shall pass is kind of my favorite motto. And then from there, it's what does that look like after?
What was your biggest learning for preparing for a transition, for buying a business and making that successful?
From a transition standpoint, I think one of the biggest learnings was speed. Velocity wins. I don't think many people realize, and that's something whenever I spend time with high level thinkers and founders, velocity is the only moat because you could go and start a lot of 8 out of 10 businesses can be commoditized and vastly ubiquitous. And so the only thing that really you have to your arena outside of maybe some patents is velocity. And what I mean by velocity is challenging the status quo. You look at Elon and what he's been able to do, it's velocity. Everything needs to happen today, not tomorrow, not next week. It's today. I like to think that that's how you compress time by
Mhm.
asking the right questions. And so that's really the biggest way to get to the end goal.
What are some of the right questions that helped you get through the acquisition and the transition?
If we were doing 10 million today, you're telling me we can do 16 by next year. What
Mhm.
would it take to get to 30? And what would need to happen for that to happen? And you start to reframe your thinking. So it's more so, okay, well, I would need to hire at least 3 more developers. I need a bigger warehouse because we're going to be shipping more. I need to hire 5 times more salespeople because we need to do more outreach. So a lot of it was on a hiring schedule then and say, okay, well, for that to happen, how do we cut down from not just hiring, but how do we be more efficient? So if I can get 1 more hour of output per employee a day, or we had one more additional team meeting a week for alignment, and we cured that inefficiency or any bottlenecks, we get the head of our warehouse in the meetings, we get the people who are on the ground floor who ship in the meetings to help make decisions so we can accelerate the outcome of solving problems versus sit in a boardroom and make romantic points of views helps accelerate that endpoint.
Yeah.
There's many different ways of doing it, and then just challenging the status quo. Obviously, without revenue, any business dies. But I do think that there's ways of reframing the thinking to drive velocity and outcomes from employees. Part of that, from a leadership perspective, it is your duty to do that. And I think part of that is the questions you ask those employees because they haven't been asked it in a different way before. It's just been accepted that, hey, that's just the way it is.
I love the question of what would need to happen for us to reach this dream goal. It's just a deal con in Austin, which was run by Tom Shipley. And he was saying, make a goal of your revenue and then add a zero to it. And then what would need to happen for you to reach this? And then he's like, now add another zero. What would need to happen for you to reach this? And I feel like it's a very mind opening exercise. Not to say that everybody needs to make 100x of what they're initially planning to do, but it definitely helps break the status quo. So you ran Champro for about 4 or 5 years. At what point did you start thinking of selling the company?
We actually didn't think of selling the company. We were approached. And sometimes you're approached and a number's put in front of you. And it's too good to turn down. So that's when a collective decision was made.
And how did the deal come together? How did the approach happen? And how long did it take to put the deal together?
It was mostly inbound. I always say we have a romantic point of view of what life should look like, right? And when life doesn't meet our expectations, is where the gap of unhappiness happens. What I've learned from business is every deal takes 3 times as long as you think. Most people think it'll happen in 30 days, 45 days, or 3 months, but double that. So that's really something tangible. I think a lot of people have misexpectations on
Mhm.
outcomes. So for us, it took 3 times as long. To put it into context, it took 9 months, and then for that to kind of actual transaction to happen from the start of conversation and going through due diligence, etc. And at any point, there's many different factors where the deal can fail. You get to LOI stage, and then from there, diligence stage, and diligence is where 90% of deals fail. And then even after that, when the final sign off, the restructuring of the economics can change after the diligence stage.
That's such a useful benchmark. I definitely was under the impression that if you get approached by a buyer, the deal will be much faster. But sounds like 9 months is the right expectation to set. You said that there are multiple points during which the deal can fail. Were there any points where you felt like it could fail?
Yeah, absolutely. During diligence stage, it is many different points where it can because the outcome, and at the same time, you have to realize that whilst this is taking place, you have to keep running your business, right? And make sure the numbers match the expectations of the projections and the revenues that you've benchmarked for the year, which you've told them at the start of the deal 4 months ago that you were going to hit. And that changes the scope of that deal. And essentially, like, then you have to obviously keep it to yourself because you don't want your employees to be distracted whilst you're trying to get more out of them to make sure that they hit their goals that you've set on the outset, internally and out externally as well. So a lot of people don't realize how complex it is, right?
Yeah, you really don't know how complex it is until you go through it, as I've heard from most people. It sounds like you ran your company in a very efficient and organized way. Was there anything that you had to do to prepare for the diligence process?
Yeah, I mean, you bring in an outside counsel
Mhm.
that kind of prepares you who's gone through this process before. So, and they kind of give you the requisites as far as like documents to procure certificates, IPs. Any IP you have makes a company more valuable. Any assets that you own, and when I say assets, I mean like warehousing, storage facilities, etc.
Mhm.
On the books makes a company more valuable from a balance sheet perspective. We had an outside group that kind of came in and procured that for us. So, yeah.
And who would you recommend to have on your council?
Uh, it's subjective. It depends on the industry, right? And so when it comes to the council side of things, it really depends on the industry. I'd say, and some of the larger groups out there, right? McKinsey's are always great, PwC, etc., because they're reputable. They have the logo.
And apart from being surprised by how long the deal took, was there anything else that surprised you about the process of selling a business?
Yeah, as human beings, we're emotional creatures. And I think the reality is, any given time, it's complex and there's emotions attributed towards it. And so you're always at an edge whenever you get a call, etc., around kind of the structure of the deal and going back and forth, because at any time, either party can pull out of the deal, right? And it's a waste of time. And so it's obviously you have benchmarks in place to not there's penalties if that's to occur, but still, and they can. But yeah, so I think from my point of view, I wouldn't say there's anything that really surprised me. I just think you go through a roller coaster of emotions.
You seem like a very mental health focused guy. How do you go through that roller coaster of emotions in a healthy way?
Yeah, in a healthy way, I think it's more so understanding this too shall pass. I'm a big believer in the human experience. It's more so moving at speed and then knowing that how do we get to the next point and the next point and the next point in the deal, the conversation and the process all along the way.
Yeah. Just put a post-it note on your computer that says this too shall pass. And how is this deal structured?
So it was half cash, half equity with a 2-year earnout, of which just over 15 months was done. So that was kind of the top line structure of the deal.
And just for the audience, can you explain how the half equity part works?
Yeah, so essentially, it was a larger company in the same ecosystem as ours that acquired us. And the goal was to do a roll up and look to go public. And so, obviously, based on that, it's an equity granted, an equity grant with a vesting based on that, that you're vested over 2 years based on my earnout. That, hey, by the way, you can participate in kind of Topco shares, meaningful shares with the acquiring parent company. And then obviously those turn into more intrinsic value once they go public or there's a liquidity event.
And the vesting happens as you stay on as an employee of the company, or are
So
there any
they're
other
structured
benchmarks?
many different ways. Again, half cash, half equity. Half of the equity is given up front, and then as part of a good faith towards that deal, and then the other half is based on the earnout.
And also for the audience, can you explain what an earnout is?
Yeah, so an earnout is basically when a comes to acquire your company and they want to make sure that there's no brain drain, essentially. That was an initial format for an earnout is okay, well, if I sell my company and I pass it on to you today, Kate, you may not know what to do. But if I stay on for an additional 2 years to teach you how to fly that plane, then yeah, you have 2 years of a kind of intellectual capital for myself, who's ran it for the last 10 years, passed on to you. And then thereafter, you're a good pilot and you can fly it.
Thank you. And so you had to stay on as an employee after the acquisition. What did that look like for you, and what did that feel like?
It's an interesting scenario. If I could do it again, I wouldn't. Just because, yeah, it's a weird feeling being in a company that is acquired and then there's other people around it and you've always ran it a certain way and now it's being run a different way and immediately and there's people making decisions which sometimes you're not involved in. There's contradictions to that, and when I say contradictions, I mean there's pros and cons. But I think for my own personal POV, I would have done it differently.
So as you were selling your company, you started Coact Capital. How did your experience growing and selling Champro shape your strategy for Coact?
Yeah, I've always been interested in the investment space. And I think from a co-op perspective, that was why that was set up as far as an investment vehicle that we can invest in different companies. When I set out to set up co-act, I didn't want to benchmark the same way other investments vehicles have out there. What does that mean? It means how I look at deals. I've always looked at deals and investing as a fast track MBA for myself. One, when I diligence deals. Number two, outside of making real world economics and capturing alpha in terms of different deals, you go into deals to make money. That's the reality of it. That's the black and white of it. But at the same time, what else? The what else is more so driven by the founder. Who am I supporting? Do I believe in them? And I've seen companies with not an amazing product, but an incredible founder win. And their ability to pivot and recognize when to pivot and change and also raise capital. I think as a founder, you need a couple different skills. You need to be able to pivot, you need to be able to raise capital. Raising capital is storytelling and you need to be able to kind of forecast the future. And what I mean by that is being a visionary, being able to see something, pull that future.
So a part of your due diligence is a family dinner.
Correct. Yes.
And you shared off the pod that Coact Capital also looks at blue ocean and pink ocean problem spaces. Uh,
Yeah, sure. So from that capacity, I'm not sure if many people know kind of the variables around kind of red, blue, and pink ocean. Red ocean being a saturated market, and blue ocean, you're early in a market and you solve the problem before the end user realized they had a problem, right? And the pink ocean, which I referenced, is essentially the end consumer has realized they have a problem and are actively trying to solve it themselves before you meet them. So those are the big differentiation points and variables there.
you've invested in over 27 companies. How did selling the company influence the way you assess founders and companies?
One of the things I talked about velocity, right? And I think one of the other things is working smart. I'm a big believer that you need to work hard with the caveat of working hard to get smart. And what I mean by that is just working efficiently at how you're applying technology in today's world into real world problems and to be able to kind of have 10x the output, sometimes 100x the output. And so I think that's something there that we should look at. And that's kind of what I look at as well.
I usually save this question for the end, but given that you're talking about working smart now and maxing output with the help of technology, I'm going to ask it now, which is how do you use AI across your portfolio companies?
Yeah, I great question by the way, and I believe everyone should be using AI. But you have to realize that it's inevitably going to come and swallow everything up, right? And we all know that. And so the way I use it now is obviously it's changing rapidly on a weekly basis. I use Claude from a model perspective. I use Manus and I use OpenAI. I use all three simultaneously for different things. And then I use OpenClaw as well as far as just output and efficiency. I think people use AI, but it's using it. What are you using it for? And so within reason, I use one model for thinking as far as a co-thinker with me, like challenging my thinking. I've trained it enough well now that it can challenge the status quo of how I think. And I use another model for output as far as creating output in terms of presentations, decks, etc. And I use a third model for research. And so that's sort of how I use it. And when I say output, I mean actually execution, as in connecting it, being able to build decks on Canva for me, and then kind of pre-program future calls, can research whoever I'm talking to in the future in advance and create an outline of what they care about, what their last wins, if it's highlighted publicly, and then where they're from, just any sort of details. And so I can go into that call more effective as to the synergies and get straight to the point.
Love that. And which model do you use for which of those tasks?
So for research, I use Manus. Manus is incredibly great for research. It's okay building decks to some degree, needs a lot of pre-prompting. For Claude, I use Claude Opus. I find Opus is more in depth. You can do more with it versus Sonnet. They're both different and good at different things, but I find Opus is what I use. And I use Opus programmed into OpenClaw with several APIs, and I just build my own as far as bots of what I want them to do for each company. And I also use it to diligence deals, many levels, and research the criteria in industries now. And then I also use it to plug into my HubSpot via an open API so I can log any contacts I have, any phone calls, founders, etc. And then I use OpenAI to challenge ChatGPT to challenge my thinking as far as a thinking partner for future ideas I have, because I've trained it over 3 years now, on 2 years, on kind of my favorite books, the way I like to think, and also my notes, and also what I do, my day to day, and everything else around.
I absolutely love that. So you're saying you put PDFs of books into ChatGPT and then you have it think from that perspective and
Yeah.
challenge you from the perspective
Yeah,
of the
it's all
author.
about prompts. It's all about the prompts. I find with a lot of the models, you're only as good as how you're able to prompt it. And a lot of people just single line prompts are kind of redundant. You need to give deeper layers of thinking for it to do more for you.
Mhm.
The kind of the prompting around it. And prompt engineering is a real thing, as you know. So I think from my perspective, that's something that's valuable.
Thank you for sharing that tip. Moving to the more tangible world, I'd love to talk to you about tech ball. So, for people who don't know, it's played by some of the biggest names in soccer, including Messi and Beckham. Can you tell us what is tech ball and how did you take it from 70 countries to over 150?
Pegball is an amalgamation of soccer played on a curved ping pong table. It's almost a cross between soccer and ping pong. If you ever look it up, it was originally a training tool for soccer players and athletes, and then from there we grew substantially, and we turned it into a sport in itself. And from there again, we grew. I like to say we were knee deep in oil looking for gold when someone told us gold is what matters. And what I mean by that is we had a sport equipment that was being used by athletes on a global level. And the way we commercialized it and fast tracked it is by turning it into a sport. And then that's how we gained notoriety, velocity, and hyperbolized it on a global level. And so where we're at right now is we've grown substantially. We're across 156 plus countries around the world. We're lobbying to be part of the Olympic Games, and we have been accepted into the Asian Beach Games, African Beach Games, and the Sea Games in Asia, and the European Games as well as an official medal sport.
I did not realize that it was used for training of soccer players. I thought it was a completely new thing. That's fantastic that you were able to take it to so many countries, and I would love to dive in deeper. It's not often that I get to talk to someone who is taking a sport and lobbying for it to be included in the Olympics. How does one do that?
Yeah, cultural relevance is a real thing. I always say at Techball, we sit at the intersection of main and main, which is culture and lifestyle, right?
Mm.
And what I mean by that is like, how do you make a sport cool?
Yeah.
And the way you make a sport cool is you kind of penetrate culture, and culture lives in, like I would say, like the X Games. That's culture with Aspen, Shaun White, etc. And the X Games. That's culture. NHL and hockey. That's culture. Surfing. That's culture. And we penetrated all of these and partnered with all these leagues to run events for Tech Ball and collabed with them for activations. And so we penetrated their audience who saw tech ball as cool, and then that's how we adopted it. Now, to facilitate and get a sport to the Olympic Games is not an easy feat. There's a lot of lobbying that you have to do. And the way it works is each country, host country, has a menu of sports that they have to pick to be part of their games. So Tokyo had a menu of sports. There's a menu of prerequisite sports, and there's a menu of non prerequisite sports. What I mean by non prerequisite, non Olympic recognized sports. And so it's more so going through that journey and lobbying as we lobby to be part of an Olympic recognized sport, approaching the different variations of countries that are hosting games and saying, hey, will you consider adding tech ball as a non Olympic sport to your games? And so that's something that's considered. And then the requisite sports are like your track and field, aquatics, all the above. Heritage sports have been in the games for generations. And then you have new sports. That's why how skateboarding was able to enter Tokyo, and then
Mm.
breakdancing for Paris, because they were non-Olympic recognized sports that were picked by the host countries to add to the games. And so part of that is a lobbying venture, which is very long, arduous, and somewhat tumultuous. So it takes a lot of time and patience and a lot of years ahead in terms of future casting and speaking to the right people. Yeah. So
That's so interesting. I did not realize there was a menu of sports involved in the Olympics, and hope that when we talk in 2028, I can congratulate you on Tegball being included in the Olympics. So you're also a co-founder of Ultimate Snooze, which is a sleep technology company that you're doing with Gary Brecka, a human biologist and longevity expert with millions of followers. How did that partnership come about? And what made you wanna get into the sleep space?
yeah, absolutely. I've always been passionate about longevity and health and wellness, and a portfolio of my investments are based across that ecosystem. And so when you realize that sleep is the first inning of longevity, and a lot of people don't realize or know what they're sleeping on, they buy a hack on a day-to-day basis, take every vitamin possible. They sauna, they cold plunge, they infrared therapy and hyperbaric chamber and cryotherapy and all the above, but they don't know what they're sleeping on. And for 9 hours, 8 hours, 6 hours a night, they're sleeping on VOCs, mattresses that off gas, and those VOCs and glues cause asthma and can cause different health outcomes that you don't realize, but you're going to your doctor trying to solve and figure out, why do I have this condition? And so once you realize that, you realize that what we sleep on for 8 hours a day, 365 days a year, and for our lifetime, a third of our life matters. And so that's where that started. And it started by trying to change the status quo in the messaging around asking people, what are you sleeping on? And I bet you the next time you're in a group of friends and you ask a collective circle, like, hey, what are you guys sleeping on? What type of bed? maybe two people out of six or five would know. The rest would just be like, I don't know. So I think it really, really matters as much as what we put in our bodies, because as you know, like the environment detects your environment detects your kind of your mindset and the way you feel and your outcome as a human being. It affects your energy as well. And so that's where that started. And then we ended up building the Ultimate Snooze, which is essentially a sleep technology company focused on providing organic sleep materials. And when I say materials, bedding, sheets, all the above to mass consumers. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And how did you get connected with Gary Brecka?
Through a mutual friend. So a friend of mine who's also a business partner in the company connected us. And from there, we saw an opportunity to kind of, I would say, create value and inform the consumers about this space. And that's where we set off to launch a company.
And now, when you invest in founders, do you gift them a mattress?
Not quite. Not
Not
quite.
quite. Or do you do that as part of your due diligence? Ask them what
Yeah.
mattress they sleep on?
Yeah. I think for me, when I invest in founders now, I like spending time with them. And the set of questions I do ask them, I think, is what compresses time and prompts kind of what the output is for whether I want to invest or not.
And as someone who has acquired a company, sold a company, what made you choose the investment route and starting a company again rather than acquiring companies and potentially rolling them up?
The investment side of things is because I believe in humanism. I think human beings are underrated on many levels. I think some of us have special powers when we realize that, like, the potential upside and the alpha we can capture in our lifetime, right? And trying to be the best we can. And part of that is solving problems. If you look at the meaning of life, the meaning of life is to see how much of your talent and potential you can fulfill whilst enriching others around you. That's kind of my interpretation of meaning of life, right? Yours may be just finding joy and happiness in everything you do. I do think joy and happiness is a huge part of that as and finding your potential. And so as I look at that and I apply that to different founders, it's like, okay, what does when work feels like play, then you are a founder with high upside,
Mhm.
when you just enjoy working and it feels like play to you and you can do it frictionlessly and passively more than most others can, and you have a good cerebral horsepower, then that's a big deal.
Yeah, and that's such a beautiful meaning of life. I love that. I might borrow that from you. Uh, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Who else do you think we should have on the pod?
I think perhaps a dear friend of mine, Kevin Baumgartner. Kevin sold his company and now runs a family office. Has had a lot of real world experiences. I think he's someone that should be on. When I say real world experiences, he's traveled a lot on a global level and so has perspective. He's someone you should have.
Would love to have Kevin on the pod.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.